Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and anime. Where to even begin? Oh my god. So, anime is a big part of my life. I have been a fan of it for like 30 years at this point. For context, if you did not know, I am 36 to give you a better idea of things. So, it has been part of my life even before I heard the word anime. And so throughout this video, I want to talk about anime and how math is used throughout both in the worlds of different animations and at the same time with anime as a whole. And as well as my history with it and just so many other things along the way and how math has just been this crucial part of it all. Um, so it's just like, oh my God, again, where to begin, right? Um, so for my channel, I've actually talked about anime a lot. The Math and Dragon Ball series alone covers a lot. But I've also talked about it in different ways. Like I've talked about math and animation. I've talked about math and Toonami. I've talked about 30 years of anime for me. And I've talked about anime in so many other ways. But this is the first time like I'm having a video that's more traditional with some of my other math in the world sort of videos. Um, let's get into it. So to start with anime, right? It's animation, right? There's a lot of math built in on that idea that one, we're dealing with a lot of motion and getting that across, and we're also dealing with shapes, right? So those two things alone are mathematical in nature, and that could be applied to this universe as a whole. But that's a whole other story for another day that I've talked about before, and I'll talk about again. But when it comes to anime, it's that idea that at least over here in the West, we're specifically thinking about anime is animation that's from Japan or depending on who you talk to, inspired by that. Um, Anime in general just means animation in Japan. I'm sorry, in Japanese. But with that in mind, right? I grew up again watching anime before I even knew what that was. The first three that I can think of is Transformers, Voltron, and Speed Racer. One of those is my first anime. I just can't remember which one. And following those, soon after was Ronin Warriors, aka Samurai Troopers, which I am rewatching now, by the way. And then following that, kind of a wave of anime after that, and we'll get to it. But kind of going back to like how math is used in the general sense. Again, right? We're dealing with shapes, we're dealing with motions, or the illusion of it in some cases, and what we're trying to get across. And when it comes to that idea, right? Like there's math in the characters, how they're designed, the proportions, how they scale to other characters and environments, and there's math in how those environments are drawn. And then when it comes to the motion part, there's math in showing a character moving. There's math in showing how fast they're moving and getting that across. And when we're dealing with characters that are like dealing with these like crazy speeds and crazy feats of strength, we have to illustrate that, right? We have to get that idea across, and there's math in that, right? There's math in showing how fast a character is, because maybe that character is shown moving a lot and in various positions while other characters might seemingly be still, right? Or it might be that the character that's moving fast might not appear as though they're moving at all, or it might appear that they're barely moving while other characters are just giving it all and moving fast. Either way you cut it, there's math involved, right? And there's math in the day to day in these animated worlds, right? And I think that's cool. There's not only math in the artwork and the animation itself, but everything that kind of goes into it, right? Because you got to figure when you're dealing with anime, you're not only dealing with that idea of actually animating, that's a big part of it, but you're dealing with how you're able to do that in the first place, right? Because if you're dealing with anime, right, we got and you're dealing with that in terms of an industry. You're going to be dealing with money, and honestly, like if you're doing it on your own, um, to varying degrees, right? So you're dealing with money, you're dealing with budget, you're dealing with production, and with that production, you're dealing with storyboarding, you're dealing with writing, you're dealing with music, you're dealing with voice acting. If you got dubs involved, you're dealing with subtitles, or you're dealing with the different language, right? And no matter how you want to go about it, you're dealing with math just all across the board, if not just for the time involved. But if we go and dissect it further, right? Um, Not only do we have all the things that we talked about with motion, shapes, proportions, and all that sort of things, um, but we have the idea of editing, right? We have the idea of using positions and using line work, using camera movement to illustrate different things within an anime. And there's math and all of that, right? Everything's a like deliberate choice because you're drawing these characters to this scale, to that scale, at this angle, at that angle, this position, that position, moving at this speed, that speed, and there's math and all that, and then there's math in the music, right? Like how that music is composed for starters, right? Like because someone had to string these notes along, right? They had to decide how long the notes were. They had to, determine the frequency of those notes, the tone, amplitude, all that good stuff, right? Of that work and the timing and how much they would play because you might have a song that's like this full thing, but you might only have a snippet of that song, and you got to decide how that's going to play out in an anime, right? Um, and on top of that, you got to decide if you're just doing a short piece versus a long piece in the first place, or you might have some segment of music that has some really identifiable motif, right? That like signature to it, and how that's used in anime is very mathematical. You can't get around music without math. And I just think it's cool how it's implemented. And speaking of music, let's talk about openings and closings. I don't know why I said closings. It's just kind of reflex. But let's talk about intros, outros, openings, endings, whatever you want to call them, right? So it's not uncommon for anime to have some sort of opening theme, and what you want to get across the show in the music and in the images is something that is artistic and something that is mathematical, right? You got to decide what clips you're going to get across. If it's action oriented, you want to get that across. If it's comedy oriented, you want to get that across. So you got to decide, well, wait, what images get across the message that I'm trying to get across? And you're you're stitching everything all together, and it's tight because you're using this opening like for multiple episodes, right? And you might use it for every episode, or you might use it for a set number of episodes and then switch. But no matter how you cut it, there's a lot of math that goes into it. The music itself, snipping the images together, again, like the tone that you want to get across, the images that you use, and everything just coming together. It's all very mathematical, and I think it's easy to just kind of roll past that because we're used to it. And then the same can be said for endings, right? You might have endings that are used for every episode. You might have endings that are used for certain episodes, certain run of episodes. And no matter how you cut it, um, you might have, I don't know, sorry, you have range. And then depending on what kind of anime you're watching, what they're kind of get across at the beginning versus the end might be different, right? Because for some action oriented anime, you might have that opening be very, very fast paced, right? You might have some like tightly structured music where it's just like boom, 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 and it's just moving, right? And you might have like fast paced images coming at you, and you might have something that sounds a little bit more upbeat, right? Or infused with energy, and there's math and all of that. And then like for an ending, you might have something that's a little bit more downbeat, something that kind of brings it down to the end. And I think like not only is there math in that, like how I was just discussing with the opening, but it kind of fits in a really cool way, right? Because like at an opening, yeah, you want to get people hyped, you want to get them ramped up, and for an ending, it's like, yeah, you're coming to a close, you want to kind of bring that in. And then back to like editing, I just really like how editing is used because it can convey how characters are moving, how they interact interact with each other. And if you get a good transition, it could show just so many cool things. And not only is there math and everything that I just said, but there's actually math in the lighting, right? How different things are shaded, the colors, right? There's layers to that. There's math in all of it, and there's voice acting, right? There's math in voice acting because not only do you have these characters, um, speaking at different volumes, but the quality of that voice coming out, right, is something that's deliberate, is something that's a choice, is something that is mathematical, as well as the breathing involved, the timing of the words as well. All of that is mathematical. And all these different qualities of sound that you can explore, are part of it. And so you also have like different formulas to play around with, right? Like different things that you're expecting in different genres of anime. And I think that's cool. And so, just in general, there's a lot of math in making an anime because, again, to talk about some of the things, right? You have the animation itself, the art styles, the character designs, the scaling, storyboarding, music, voice acting, the budget that's involved, the money that something might take to make, and the money it might make itself. And then you got to figure, you might have you might have games based off of that anime or toys based off of that anime, and like just a strategy to get everything across, right? You might have an anime that's a manga adaptation. You might have an anime that produces a manga adaptation. And with a lot of anime, it's not uncommon to like branch out into different media. And it's all connected, it's all mathematical, it's all very interesting to me. And if we talk about my experience, because this is what I'm going to pivot into. I've gotten to talk about um, this in several videos, and I definitely wanted to do it here. So, like I was saying earlier, I started 30 years ago, right? Like with anime, like I said, Speed Racer, Voltron, and Transformers. One of those is my first three within that year, and then Ronin Warriors, aka Samurai Troopers, was right after. And then it wasn't that long after all of that that I was introduced to Dragon Ball and Pokemon and Card Captors, and Digimon and just so many other animes. And then when I was in middle school, I was introduced to Toonami. And I have a whole video on that, which you should check out, which I'm going to leave in the description along with a lot of other videos and links, so you should check them out. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of rolling with it. I don't know. I'm excited. So with Toonami, that was huge because it was during my earlier experiences with Toonami that I even came across the term anime, and it's like, oh snap! I have watched this before, you know, and having that good context. And I think it was interesting because back when I was a kid, right, like I felt like some anime how it was produced and how it was distributed was kind of odd because they would shy away from Japanese culture even though it was coming from Japan, and that was super weird. But like that's gotten so much better over time. And if you're wondering, sub or dub, because I feel like that comes up for me, I don't care. I have watched a lot of anime dubbed. That's how I was introduced to it. But I've also watched a lot of anime subbed because, if you're in that fandom long enough, you're going to get exposed to that. And you know what? I like it both ways. And I do have to say that I appreciate that dubbing has gotten a lot better. Because there was a time where either you didn't get the best work or, just lousy direction, or there was a lot of changes. And again, that's gotten a lot better. So anyway, when I was younger, and I was into Toonami, like I had already been watching Dragon Ball before that, and then when it came to Toonami, we got like more of it, right? So it went from me watching that 1 day a week to five, and it was crazy. And it was very interesting because I got exposed to a lot of different anime that way, and then like later Adult Swim, um, and then just a lot of things on my own after that. And I did slow down like for a while. This year in particular, I've been watching more anime, and that's been nice. And going back to Tsunami, like I said, I make a whole video of it, but the idea was like back when I started watching it, right, it was like this several hours long block where, you'd have different anime featured regularly, and then this would alternate as things were completed or new things were introduced. And then in between the anime itself, right, like you had these segments where there was a whole kind of show within this block. And that was cool because you had Toonami and you had Tom, and Tom had a whole story, and there was the dude before Tom. It was crazy. But anyway, there was math in that too, right? Like math in the schedule itself, but math in the animation involved with Tom and his whole journey, and they had like these different intros to like amp things up, and it was a time. And I would watch things like Dragon Ball. And stuff like that. But before that, I saw like some shows that I had seen before get onto there, like Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, Card Captors, stuff like that. And then once you got past the shows that like I had already been exposed to. There was stuff like Gundam, like all the different series, things like Yu Yu Hakusho, Tenchi Muyo, which I was not a fan of, but I wasn't like against it. And you had Ronin Kenshin, Samurai X, whatever you want to call it. Um, Ronin Warriors, they brought that to there too. Again, like AKA Samurai Troopers, whatever you want to call it. And so they had a lot of things. And then with like Dragon Ball, it was such an interesting thing because I grew up being exposed to Dragon Ball Z first, and later on, like during Toonami, you still had Dragon Ball Z going, but then you had Dragon Ball. And so, for me and for a lot of other people, right, it was kind of like, you're watching this show and then you kind of get a prequel series, but, that series that you feel like is a prequel series isn't actually a prequel series, right? It was the first one, but that's just how we were introduced. So for me, it was Dragon Ball Z, and then it was Dragon Ball, then GT, and then later Super once we got there. But it's like that for a lot of other people. But there's some people in this world where they grew up watching Dragon Ball first, and then Z, and then GT, and then later Super, and everything in between. And with Dragon Ball, like one of the things that I like that was introduced in Z is the idea of like power levels and power scaling, and I've done so many videos on that. But I like that because it gets across to me why a lot of people like math more than they think, and why they find it more useful than they think. Because the idea of power levels kind of comes in two folds in a very interesting way to me. Because on one hand, right, it's useful in order to compare characters to another, right? Because like when you're dealing with power levels or battle power, whichever one you prefer, the idea is you're supposed to get an idea of how powerful an opponent is, how strong, how fast, etc. Right? And this is measured, right? You see a numerical version of that person's power, and again, that could be useful for comparisons. That could be useful for scaling. But what I also find fascinating, and this is why I was saying that it works like twofold for like math, is that it's also this brilliant lesson in data analysis. Because right, you have power levels which are like measured by a scouter, and later you can sense key, but the more direct numerical approach, right, you see through scouters, and with those scouters, right, they're a tool that measures your power, but it doesn't take into account that some people can hide their power, right, or they can build it and like explode it in short bursts. It doesn't take any of that into account, or that later on, we see that some people can transform, or it doesn't take an account that, someone might have a base, but through training, they can get much stronger, or, like different power ups and things like that. It doesn't take account a lot. And for the most part, if we're going off of what we see, a lot of people in the universe don't have those things that I just mentioned apply to them, right? But we see all characters that we follow throughout Dragon Ball have those abilities, and so they complicate things. And so it's fascinating because on one hand, a scouter can be a tool that tells you something about an opponent, but on the other hand, it can be something that can trip you up. And I find that fascinating. And I say it's an interesting lesson on data analysis because, like, I feel like this is applicable to the real world. Because see, here's the thing, right? When we're looking at data, right? Um, we should always be asking some questions about it. It can be useful in the right hands, but we got to ask about like how was this measured and by who and with what? What are they trying to tell you? What are they trying to sell you? What are they trying to see? What are they trying to convey? Like what is the deal with data, right? That's what you're trying to figure out. And you always have to keep those sort of things in mind because even if someone had the best intentions, they might not have the right tools or they might not have enough information to get proper data, or it could be just one of those things where, I mean, yeah, that's kind of built in, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, because one of the things is like, over time we're building up more data, we're getting a better understanding about that, and we understand there might be stuff that we didn't look at, or stuff that might have had some sort of bias in it, and you could argue that everything's going to have that to a degree, but it's like trying to eliminate that as much as possible can be useful, or trying to have a better understanding of it. And with power levels, what I also find funny, and interesting and kind of cool at the same time is that we cannot let that go as a community for Dragon Ball. And I think that's because of how math is in the real world, right? Math is something that's universal. And when we look at it in the academic, traditional sense, we're trying to make sense of things and we're given tools to try to make sense of things. And that is our instinct. And I think that comes through with power levels and power scaling, and it's why we don't let it go, and it's why so many people get frustrated about Dragon Ball later on. But sometimes you gotta let it go. But all that being said, there's a lot of like math in the daily life of these different characters. Sometimes like right directly, but then sometimes in just like how they function, how they flow, because math is in everything and it's everywhere. Um, all of that being said, I'm a big fan of anime. It's been in my life for 30 years that I'm aware of, right? I could have been exposed to it even sooner. I don't know. But I'm a big fan of it. And there's so many anime out there that just have these multimedia franchises at this point, and there's math and all of that, right? Because something like Dragon Ball, right? Like, it started as a manga. Then it got the anime adaptation, and there's games about it, and there's just so many other things about it. And there's math and all that, and adapting that material and getting the ideas of speed and motion across and character interactions in the world that those characters live in. In any case, yeah, so math and anime, it's a good combo. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you got something out of it. And I'll see you in the next one. Professor Prime out.